Tonight I'm bringing you a story so fierce and tender at the same time. It'll make your heart ache in the best way. Deep in the red rock wilds of the Arizona frontier, where the wind carries the scent of sage and gunpowder, fate tied a condemned woman to the most feared Apache alive. It began with a noose waiting at dawn, and a devil's bargain no one saw coming. Hit that like button if you're ready for a love story carved out of fire and dust, and tell me in the comments, where are you tuning in from? Me? I was nothing more than a woman running from a shadow I couldn't shake, with a noose already knotted for my neck. My errand was pure suicide. Walk straight into the heart of an Apache stronghold, gentle the wild beast, and somehow talk him into inking a treaty. I went in hoping to save my own hide, braced for a monster straight out of nightmare. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that same monster would be the first man to ever look at me like I was truly a woman. And I sure as hell never figured the man who made whole regiments shake in their boots would one day drop to his knees before me. The dust in that cell tasted like blood and bad choices. Vespera Flint perched on the thin edge of the cot, hands shaking. Not from the heat that smothered the Tucson territorial prison like a heavy blanket, but from the cold certainty that come sunrise tomorrow, they'd march her out to the gallows. A narrow barred window cut the brutal Arizona sun into 3 harsh blades across the stone floor. Outside, the steady thump, thump, thump of a hammer echoed. They were testing the trap door. Vespera shut her eyes tight. She didn't regret squeezing the trigger. Her husband, Malik Thorne, had been a mean drunk who swore he'd end her that night. She just beat him to it. But in the eyes of 1885 law, a woman who shot a man in the back, even to save her own life, was nothing but a cold-blooded killer. The massive iron door scraped open with a mournful groan. Vespera didn't look up until a long shadow fell across her boots. Mrs. Flint. The voice was polished, smooth as silk, completely wrong for a dungeon. She lifted her gaze to see Colonel Draven Voss standing there, immaculate in his crisp blue uniform, gold buttons flashing, mustache waxed to razor perfection. He pressed a folded handkerchief to his nose, trying and failing to block the prison stink. "Colonel," Vespera rasped, throat raw from days without enough water. "Come to measure me for the rope?" Voss gave a low, dark chuckle and stepped inside while his guard stayed posted outside the door. "You've got real fire in you, Vespera. Shame to waste it so young. What are you, 26? 25, she corrected. "A damn shame." Voss sighed, pacing the cramped cell. "I've got an offer for you, Mrs. Flint. A stay of execution. A full pardon, actually. Signed by the governor himself." Vespera's heart slammed against her ribs. She rose slowly. "What's the catch? I won't warm your bed, Colonel. I'd sooner swing." Voss's eyes narrowed. "Your virtue holds no interest for me, ma'am. I'm after your skills. You were a school teacher before you married that brute. You speak French. You understand the fine art of negotiation." "I do." "Perfect." Voss turned to face her squarely. "There's trouble up in the Dragoon Mountains. An Apache chief named Kaelith. Folks call him the Wolf. He's pulled 3 feuding bands together under one banner. He's cutting my supply lines to ribbons, torching homesteads, and making me look like a fool to the brass back in Washington." "So send your cavalry," Vespera said. "I did. They don't ride back." Voss's face hardened. "Washington wants a treaty. They want pictures in the newspapers. They want proof the frontier's been civilized. I got word to Kaelith. He's agreed to a parley 2 months from now, but only on one condition." "He wants to read the white man's paper before he marks it," Vespera guessed. "Exactly. He demanded a tutor, someone neutral, not military." Vespera let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. "And you picked me? To teach an Apache war chief?" "You've got nothing left to lose," Voss said with a shrug. Refuse, you hang at dawn. Accept, you might die up there anyway. But there's a chance. Stay 6 weeks in his camp. Teach him enough English to grasp the treaty. Make sure he signs on the agreed day. You walk out free. Clean record. $500 in your pocket. Vespera stared at the thin slivers of sunlight slicing the floor. The hammering outside had stopped. The silence rang louder than the noise ever did. "He'll cut my throat the second I step into that camp," she whispered. "Maybe," Voss replied, glancing at his pocket watch. "But Kaelith has his own strange code of honor. He asked for a teacher. I'm giving him one." "So, Vespera," Voss said, blue eyes cold as winter steel, "do you take the rope you know is waiting, or the mountains and whatever waits there?" She met his gaze. She knew in her bones this man was a rattlesnake in a fancy uniform, but the need to keep breathing was stronger than fear. "I'll go," she said. Voss smiled, but it never touched his eyes. "Smart choice. Pack light, Mrs. Flint. You ride within the hour, and wear something plain. Kaelith already hates our kind enough." "I'll go," Vespera said, the words tasting like dust and defiance. Colonel Draven Voss smiled, but his eyes stayed cold as a winter grave. "Good choice. Pack what little you've got, Mrs. Flint. We ride in less than an hour, and put on something plain, nothing flashy. Kaelith already despises folks like us plenty." The ride stretched into 3 brutal days, cutting deep into the badlands. Vespera rode flanked by a jumpy lieutenant named Rune Calder and 3 scouts who never let their hands stray far from the grips of their Winchester repeaters. The world shifted under them, from the gritty, sun-bleached streets of Tucson to the raw, red, jagged teeth of the Dragoon Mountains. This was old country, hostile and timeless. Heat poured off the canyon walls like a blacksmith's forge. By the 3rd day, they reached a tight slot called Dead Man's Gorge. "Lieutenant." Calder yanked his horse to a stop. "This is where we stop, ma'am," he said, voice cracking like dry leather. He pointed toward a thin, twisting trail that vanished into the shadowed cliffs. "His scouts have been shadowing us for 5 miles. If we push any farther, we're dead men." Vespera swung down from the saddle. She wore a plain gray dress, the high collar choking her in the furnace heat, and clutched a worn leather satchel holding 2 books, a Bible, a slim volume on contract law, and 1 spare set of clothes. "You're just leaving me here?" she asked, fighting to keep the fear out of her tone. "He knows you're coming," Calder replied, already wheeling his horse. "Good luck, Mrs. Flint. Lord knows I hope you don't need it." With a cloud of red dust boiled up as the soldiers spurred hard back the way they'd come. Then silence swallowed everything. Vespera stood alone. The canyon held its breath. High overhead, a hawk screamed. She squared her shoulders. She'd already killed a man to stay alive. She could damn well climb a hill. She walked for an hour under the merciless sun, bonnet wilting, legs burning. Just when she thought her knees would buckle, she rounded a sharp bend and froze. They were waiting. 12 of them. Apache warriors painted in ochre and charcoal, bodies blending so perfectly into the rock she hadn't seen them until she was close enough to spit. Rifles and bows in steady hands, faces carved from stone. Unreadable. Unforgiving. At the center sat a man astride a massive black stallion. No shirt, just a vest of sun-darkened leather. His bronze skin bore the white scars of old battles across shoulder and chest. Long black hair, raven dark, bound back with a strip of red cloth. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart, deep, sharp, burning with a hatred that had simmered for generations. This was Kaelith. He said nothing. He simply stared, letting the stallion snort and paw the ground. His gaze raked over her gray dress, her sunburned face, her trembling fingers. Vespera cleared her throat, remembering Voss's parting words. "Show no fear." "I am Vespera Flint," she said, voice ringing faintly off the canyon walls. "Colonel Voss sent me to teach you." Kaelith nudged the stallion forward. The horse loomed over her like a dark thunderhead. He leaned down until his face was inches from hers. She smelled sage smoke, horse sweat, and pure danger. He spat deliberately beside her boot, then straightened and snapped a command in Apache. 2 warriors seized her arms. "Wait!" she cried. "I'm here under a flag of truce!" Kaelith ignored her completely. He turned his mount and started up the trail. The warriors didn't drag her. They pushed, hard enough that she had to trot to keep pace with the horses. She wasn't a guest. She was a prisoner. The camp lay hidden in a natural stronghold, a box canyon reached only by the narrow path they'd climbed. Wickiups of brush and canvas sprawled across the floor. Smoke drifted from cook fires, and the rich scent of roasting venison twisted her empty stomach into knots. When the riders entered, the camp fell deathly quiet. Women paused at their grinding stones. Children froze mid-play. Hundreds of eyes locked on Vespera. She felt stripped bare under that collective stare, a pale ghost who didn't belong here. The warriors shoved her toward the big central fire. Kaelith dismounted with the easy power of a mountain lion, passed his reins to a boy, and turned to face her. "You," he said. The single word landed heavy, accented, but clear. Vespera smoothed her dress, brushing red dust from the fabric. "Yes, I'm the teacher." "You are a spy," Kaelith said, voice low and rolling like distant thunder. "I'm not," she shot back, forcing herself to meet those burning eyes. It took every scrap of courage she had left. "I'm no spy for them, Kaelith," Vespera said, forcing her voice steady even as her heart hammered. "I'm a prisoner of my own people. If I don't do this, they'll stretch my neck from a rope. I've got no loyalty to the army." Kaelith stepped closer, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a wolf circling wounded prey. His dark eyes never left her face as he reached out and caught a stray lock of hair that had slipped free from her bonnet. Vespera flinched at the touch, but held her ground. "Hair like sun-bleached straw," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "Skin pale as fresh milk." "You'll scorch out here," he added. "Then I'll scorch," she answered without flinching. "But I've got work to finish." "The colonel said you wanted to read the treaty paper. I brought the books." Kaelith snatched the leather satchel from her shoulder in one swift motion. He turned it upside down, dumping everything onto the red dirt, the Bible, the law volume, her hairbrush, a small hand mirror. With a casual flick of his boot, he sent the Bible tumbling into the flames. "No!" Vespera lunged, but a warrior's iron grip yanked her back. She watched the pages blacken and curl, the fire eating the words like hungry tongues. "White man's lies," Kaelith said flatly. He picked up the law book, held it high for a moment, then thrust it toward her. "This," he said, "is the white man's trap." "It's the law," Vespera shot back, chest heaving. "If you want to outsmart them, you have to know how their rules work." Kaelith studied her for a long beat. Something shifted in those obsidian eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or the first crack in a wall of hate. He tossed the book at her. She caught it clumsily against her ribs. "You sleep there," he said, pointing to a ragged wickiup on the camp's edge near the tied dogs. "You work with the women. Haul water. Scrape hides. Work, you eat. Don't work, you starve. And at night, if I'm not too worn out, you teach." "I'm no servant," Vespera protested, chin lifting. "I'm a teacher." Kaelith's laugh rolled out, cold, joyless, like stones grinding together. Here, you are nothing, less than the dogs. Until you prove you can last, you're just meat waiting to spoil. He turned his back and strode away, leaving her standing in the dust. The first week dragged her straight into hell. Vespera had thought her years as a farmer's wife were tough. They were nothing next to this. The Apache women, under the iron rule of their fierce matriarch Zorin, showed her zero pity. They roused her before first light. She hauled water from the creek up the steep bank until her palms split and bled. She scraped deer hides until her shoulders screamed and felt like they'd rip free. No one spoke to her. They only pointed, grunted orders. When the grown-ups looked away, the children pelted her with stones. But Vespera Flint wasn't built to shatter. She ripped strips from her petticoat to wrap her ruined hands. She swallowed the insults. She worked until she collapsed, then dragged herself up and worked again. Every night she sat by the central fire, law book in her lap, waiting for Kaelith. He sat with his counsel, never glancing her way. 3 nights passed, then 4. She stayed put, fighting bone-deep exhaustion, refusing to crawl to her bed until he sent her away. On the 5th night, a storm broke over the canyon. Thunder cracked the sky open. Rain fell in solid sheets. The tribe scattered to their shelters. Vespera stayed, drenched and shivering, hugging the book tight to her chest to shield it from the downpour. Kaelith stepped out of his wickiup wrapped in a thick buffalo robe. He stared at the soaked, miserable figure huddled in the mud. He walked over, rain slicking his long hair to his face. "Go inside," he ordered. "We have a lesson," she answered through chattering teeth. "I'm ready. You're freezing. You'll catch your death. Voss will claim I killed you." "I don't give a damn about Voss," she snapped, anger slicing through the cold. She struggled to her feet, boots slipping in the muck. "I gave my word. I keep it." "Do you?" Kaelith asked, staring hard. Lightning flashed, lighting her pale, stubborn face, the blistered hands, the bruised shadows under her eyes, the fierce set of her jaw. He reached out, fingers closing around her arm, strong as iron, but careful. He pulled her toward his lodge. "Get in," he growled. "I won't—" "Inside," he cut her off, "before I drag you. We'll read your damn paper." Vespera stepped through the flap. Warmth and dryness hit her like a blessing. The lodge smelled of sage and tobacco smoke. A small fire glowed in the center. Thick furs carpeted the floor. The space felt suddenly too small, too close. Intimate. Too close. Too real. Kaelith stepped in behind her and laced the flap shut, shutting out the howling storm. The lodge shrank around them in an instant, the air thick and charged. He tossed her a heavy wool blanket, rough but dry. "Dry off," he ordered, turning his broad back to grant her a sliver of privacy. "Then explain what sovereignty means." Voss threw that word around in his letter. Vespera wrapped the blanket tight over her shaking shoulders and sank down beside the low fire. She pried open the damp law book, pages sticking together like secrets. Her pulse raced, not from terror anymore, but from something sharper, hotter, crackling in the small space between them. She started reading aloud. Hours slipped by. She broke down the white man's ideas of land rights, borders, ownership. Kaelith listened with razor focus, the firelight carving shadows across his scarred chest. He was quick. Dangerously quick. His questions sliced straight through the fancy words, laying bare the contradictions in American law. "So," he said at last, voice low and rough as he leaned closer, flames dancing in his eyes. "This paper claims the land belongs to some great father in Washington. But he's never walked it, never spilled blood on it. How does a man own what he's never touched?" "It's a government idea," Vespera answered quietly. She couldn't stop staring at the hard line of his jaw, the way the fire caught the scars there. "It isn't fair, Kaelith. It's just power." "Power," he echoed, tasting the word. Then he really looked at her, deep, unflinching. "You know power, Vespera. You took a man's life." She went still, breath catching. "How do you know that? Voss sent a letter with you, told me the whole story, said you're a killer, said you're dangerous." Vespera dropped her gaze to the furs. "He was my husband. He hurt me. I ended it." A heavy silence settled, thick as smoke. Then, softly, "Good." She looked up, startled. "A woman who fights back is a woman worth respect," Kaelith said. He reached out slowly. His calloused fingers brushed the dark bruise blooming on her cheek, left by a low branch earlier that day. The touch burned like brand iron. "The women here think you're weak, but I watched you haul water. I saw you sit through the rain, waiting." His hand stayed, warm against her skin. The air in the lodge disappeared. Vespera's breath snagged in her throat. She should pull away. She should be afraid. This was the fiercest Apache alive, the killer every soldier feared. Yet staring into those dark eyes, she saw no monster, just a man carrying the slow death of his world on his back. For the first time in her life, someone truly saw her. "That's enough for tonight," Kaelith said suddenly, yanking his hand back as if scorched. "Go sleep." Vespera scrambled up, clutching the book to her chest like a shield. She bolted out into the rain, heart slamming a wild rhythm she didn't understand. She told herself it was only the rush of staying alive. She told herself she couldn't let herself feel anything for him. But as she lay shivering in her soaked blankets that night, she knew it was a lie. The breaking had started. She just wasn't sure who was breaking who. 2 weeks melted into a haze of sweat, red dust, and aching bone. Vespera Flint was no longer the soft-palmed schoolteacher from Tucson. The sun baked her skin to the color of weak coffee. Her hands toughened into rawhide. Muscles she never knew she had knotted hard across her back and arms. She learned the camp's heartbeat. Eyes down around the warriors, feet silent on the dirt, always one step ahead of Zorin's sharp commands. The old matriarch never wasted a kind word on her. But the willow switch whippings had stopped. That counted as mercy. The nights, though, they belonged to Kaelith. No matter how bone-tired she was, every evening he called her. The lessons had shifted from basic words to fierce arguments that lasted till the fire burned low. Kaelith's mind was a steel jaw, snapping up English, not to please the whites, but to turn their own language into a weapon. A slow heat simmered between them, unspoken, steady, like embers under ash. Neither named it. He watched her lips shape the words when she read. She caught herself tracing the flecks of muscle in his shoulders as he fed the fire. 2 lone hunters, locked in the same small space, circling each other, waiting to see who would lunge first, who would yield. One crisp morning, the camp buzzed with sudden urgency. Scouts had ridden in at first light with word of a big elk herd drifting through the high northern valley, a last big haul of meat before winter clamped down hard. Kaelith stepped out of his wickiup, smearing a thick black stripe across his cheekbones, the old hunter's mark. His gaze swept the camp and landed on Vespera as she stacked firewood near the edge. "Flint!" he barked. He never used her first name. "Saddle up." Vespera let the armload of wood drop. "I'm supposed to stay and help with the hides." "You're coming," he said, tone flat and final. "You need to see this land. Know who really owns it." It wasn't a question. Vespera snatched her bonnet, hurried to the skittish mare they'd given her, and swung into the saddle. Zorin watched them ride out, spitting into the dirt with plain disgust. The old matriarch didn't trust the white woman one bit, but she trusted the way her chief looked at her even less. The hunting party numbered 6 warriors, Kaelith and Vespera. They pushed hard, climbing into the thin, pine-scented air of the higher Dragoon peaks. 2 full days they trailed the herd, relentless. Vespera kept pace without a single complaint. She slept on bare ground, wrapped in one thin blanket, chewed jerky that tasted like charred wood. She felt Kaelith's eyes on her every mile, weighing her for weakness. She gave him none. On the 3rd day, they cornered the herd in a tight box canyon. The kill was swift, brutal, ancient. From a high ridge, Vespera watched Kaelith take down a towering bull elk with one clean arrow. Man, beast, and mountain bound together in a single perfect moment. Savage? Sure. But there was a fierce, wild beauty in it that woke something long buried inside her. They spent the afternoon butchering the kill. Laughter broke out among even the hardest warriors, bellies already growling for the coming feast. They were lashing quarters of meat to the pack horses when the first rifle shot split the air like a whip crack. Young Joran, barely 16, crumpled, a bloody hole blooming in his chest. Hell exploded. Warriors scattered like shadows, diving behind boulders. Kaelith snatched Vespera around the waist and hurled her behind a downed pine log, rolling in after her as bullets splintered the wood inches above their heads. "Stay down!" he roared, yanking his Winchester to his shoulder. "Who are they?" Vespera screamed over the gunfire. "Soldiers?" Kaelith rose just long enough to snap off 2 shots, then dropped back. "Worse, scalp hunters." Ice flooded Vespera's veins. Scalp hunters. Bounty men who took government pay for Apache hair, man, woman, or child. The territory's lowest scum, lower than rabid curs, muzzle flashes sparked along the opposite ridge, at least 20 of them. High ground, more guns. The Apaches were trapped. The canyon filled with the screams of dying men and horses, the acrid bite of black powder, the wet thud of lead-tearing flesh. Another warrior dropped, throat shot clean through. They were being cut to pieces. Kaelith whipped around, eyes blazing with battle rage. He shoved a heavy Colt revolver into her hands, sun-warmed metal, heavy as sin. "Can you shoot?" he demanded. Vespera stared at the gun. The weight dragged her straight back to that night in Tucson. Malak Thorne's drunken fury, the desperate choice, the ear-splitting crack. "Flint, can you shoot?" Kaelith shook her shoulder hard. "Yes," she whispered, fingers tightening on the grip. "If they take you alive," Kaelith said grimly, "you'll beg for death for days before they give it." He jerked his head toward a narrow crack in the rocks behind them. "When I draw their fire, run for that gap. Don't stop." "No," Vespera said. Kaelith stared, stunned for a heartbeat. "Do what I say, woman." "I'm not leaving you," she answered, voice trembling but iron hard. She thumbed back the hammer. "I can fight." Before he could argue, 3 attackers burst from cover, charging down the slope, howling like wolves. Bearded, filthy men in grease-stained dusters. Kaelith surged up, rifle barking like a machine. The first man dropped dead. The second spun, leg shattered. The third, a giant with a flaming red beard and a sawed-off shotgun, kept coming, eyes locked on Kaelith's exposed chest. Kaelith's rifle clicked empty. Time stretched thin. Vespera saw the red-bearded man's grin widen, finger curling on the trigger. She saw Kaelith brace for the blast. Without a thought, she rose over the log. She didn't see a man. She saw the same darkness that had lived in Malak Thorne. She leveled the heavy Colt, held her breath, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil nearly snapped her wrist. The roar deafened her. The red-bearded giant lurched backward, a perfect dark hole punched clean through the center of his forehead. He hit the rocks like a felled tree, dead before he even landed. For one frozen heartbeat, silence swallowed the canyon. Kaelith stared at Vespera. She stood tall over the log, smoke drifting lazy from the Colt's barrel. Her face had drained white as bone ash, eyes wide with the shock of what she'd done. A stray bullet hissed past her ear, yanking her back to the fight. She dropped low beside him again. Something shifted in the way Kaelith looked at her. The old contempt, the sharp suspicion. It was gone, burned away. In its place burned something fierce, raw, almost too hot to name. "Good shot," he grunted, voice rough as broken stone. He thumbed fresh rounds into his Winchester. "Now we end this." They battled on for another brutal hour, lead flying, rocks splintering, every breath tasting like gunpowder and fear. But Vespera's bullet had flipped the fight. The scalp hunters, leaderless and stripped of surprise, started pulling back. When the last echo died, the quiet pressed heavier than the gunfire ever had. 4 Apache warriors lay dead, young Joran among them. 7 bounty men sprawled in the sun, already starting to stink. Vespera slumped against the log, body shaking like a leaf in a gale. The adrenaline flood was ebbing fast, leaving her hollow and nauseous. She'd killed again. A shadow fell across her. Kaelith stood there, a bloody strip of cloth knotted tight around his left bicep, where a bullet had kissed him. He reached down, gently pried the empty revolver from her locked fingers. He said nothing. He simply held out his hand. She stared at it. Scarred, calloused, a warrior's hand built for killing. Then she took it. He hauled her up, pulling her a shade closer than necessary. For one electric second, their bodies brushed, hard muscle meeting soft curves. The air between them snapped and sparked, alive with the raw thrill of cheating death together. "You're no schoolteacher, Vespera," he said quietly, speaking her name for the very first time. His voice scraped like gravel under boots. "You've got the heart of a lobo." He turned and walked off to tend his fallen. Vespera watched him go, heart pounding so hard it hurt. In that moment she understood the real terror wasn't fear of him anymore. It was fear for him. And that was 1,000 times more dangerous. The ride back to the stronghold was grim and silent. The women's keening for the dead rolled through the canyon like a cold wind, cutting straight to the marrow. But the air had changed. When Vespera rode in behind Kaelith, head high, the Colt tucked into her sash like a badge, the stares weren't pure hate anymore. The survivors had already spread the story. The white woman had stood and fought. She'd bled for them. Even Zoran, when Vespera carried water to her later that day, gave a short, grudging nod instead of the usual glare. Coming from her, it was as close to sorry as an Apache ever got. That night, the air inside Kaelith's wickiup hung thick enough to choke a man. Vespera sat by the fire, trying to focus on the book, but the words blurred and swam. Across from her, Kaelith sat shirtless, fumbling one-handed to re-wrap the bandage on his arm, frustration carving lines into his face. She set the book aside. "Let me." He paused, then gave a low grunt of agreement. He shifted closer to the firelight. Vespera knelt in front of him. Up close he was overwhelming, the heat rolling off his skin, the sharp scent of sage and sweat and man. The broad map of his chest, scarred from battles and sun dances, rose and fell steady. Her fingers trembled just a little as she unwound the blood-soaked rag. The gash was ugly. red, swollen, a deep furrow carved through the muscle of his bicep. "It needs cleaning, right? Or it'll fester," she murmured, fighting to keep her voice even. She dipped a cloth into the herb-laced water Zorin had sent, then pressed it gently to the raw flesh. Kaelith hissed, stomach muscles snapping tight. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's nothing," he growled, staring straight ahead, refusing to meet her eyes. To reach the wound properly, she had to ease between his knees. The position felt raw, vulnerable. A spark jumped between them both. She could feel the warmth of his thighs so close to her waist. She worked carefully, methodically. He didn't flinch again. He simply watched. Watched firelight catch the gold in her hair. Watched the way her brow furrowed in focus. "Why'd you shoot that man?" he asked suddenly, voice low in the quiet lodge. "You could have just let that bastard shoot me," Kaelith said, voice low and searching. "You'd have walked away free." Vespera paused, her fingers still resting feather light on his arm, inches from the angry wound. "Those men were monsters. They'd have done things worse than killing me." Kaelith's dark eyes drilled into hers, demanding the raw truth she wasn't ready to speak aloud. "Is that the only reason?" She swallowed, voice barely above a whisper. "You're the only soul here who's treated me with even a scrap of decency. And besides, I gave my word. I need you breathing to sign that treaty." Kaelith let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the lodge walls. "That treaty? Voss's pack of paper lies." "It's your only shot," she pleaded, lifting her gaze to meet his. "The army's coming. More every day. You can't fight the whole damn world." "I'll fight till I'm dead," he said simply. No fear, no hesitation. "That's the Apache way. Better to die standing than crawl onto their reservations on my knees." He looked down at her, kneeling there in the firelight, and something in his hard face cracked, softened just a fraction. His good hand rose slowly, rough fingertips tilting her chin up. His thumb brushed the curve of her lower lip, calloused skin against velvet softness. "You're too brave for a snake like Voss," he murmured. "He doesn't deserve you." Vespera's breath caught hard in her throat. The air inside the wickiup turned thick, suffocating, heavy with heat, and something far more dangerous. He leaned down, slow and deliberate. She knew she should pull back. She knew this was pure madness, a condemned white woman and the fiercest Apache war chief alive. But her body moved before her mind could stop it. She rose to meet him. Their mouths hovered a heartbeat apart. The lodge flap ripped open with a rough snap. They jerked apart like teenagers caught stealing kisses. Vex stood in the opening, face tight with urgency. He rattled off rapid Apache, gesturing sharply toward the camp's edge. Kaelith's expression slammed back into its iron mask of command. He rose in one fluid motion, the fragile moment shattered. He snatched his rifle from the wall. "Stay here," he ordered Vespera, voice like steel. Then he vanished into the dark. Vespera stayed on her knees, trembling, lips tingling from a kiss that never landed. 3 days crawled by. The parley with Colonel Voss was only a week away now. Tension hung over the camp like gun smoke. Warriors honed knives to razor edges, checked loads in rifles, oiled actions. They prepared for peace, but braced for blood. A sick knot twisted in Vespera's gut, a gnawing premonition she couldn't shake. It centered on the supply drop Colonel Voss had sent 2 weeks earlier, the so-called gesture of goodwill that had bought her entry into the camp. Heavy wooden crates stamped U.S. Army Quartermaster sat stacked in the center, covered by a tarp. Kaelith had forbidden anyone to touch them until the treaty was signed, a matter of fierce pride. He wouldn't accept their handouts until the deal was sealed. That afternoon, While Kaelith rode patrol and the women ground corn, Vespera spotted 2 young boys poking around the crates. One had lifted a corner of the tarp. A cold spear of suspicion stabbed her heart. Voss was a rattlesnake. She knew it in her bones. Why would a snake hand over gifts? She glanced around. No one watched her. She'd earned enough trust that eyes no longer followed her every step. She crossed to the crates, shooing the boys gently. "Go play down by the river, little ones." She stood before the stack. The top crate read, "Rifles, Model 1873." Below it, .45 caliber ammunition. If Voss truly wanted peace, arming Kaelith made sense. Proof of trust. But every instinct screamed wrong. Driven by a gut-deep urge, Vespera grabbed a nearby pry bar, the one used for setting lodge poles. Heart slamming in her ears, she jammed it under the ammo crate lid and heaved with everything she had. Nails shrieked. The lid popped free. She stared inside. Rows of neat cardboard ammunition boxes. She tore one open. Brass cartridges gleamed. But something felt wrong. She lifted one. Too light. Way too light. She shook it. A dry rattle. Like sand. With shaking fingers, she bit down on the bullet and twisted. The lead slipped free. Sawdust poured into her palm like gray snow. She gasped, dropping the casing. Dummy rounds. Good for nothing but parade ground drills. Panic rising like bile, she turned to the rifle crate. She pried it open. 10 brand new Winchesters lay inside, packed in grease, shining like new money. They looked flawless. She pulled one out, wiped the cosmoline from the breech, worked the lever. Stiff. Too stiff. She leaned close, eyes narrowing on the firing pin mechanism. The pin had been filed down, just enough that it would never strike a primer hard enough to fire. These weren't gifts, they were coffins. They were death traps, plain and simple. The truth slammed into Vespera like a fist to the gut. Colonel Draven Voss had never planned on signing any treaty. His game was colder than that. He meant to coax Kaelith and his warriors into the open for a nice, civilized parley, lull them with shiny new weapons so they'd feel safe. The second the shooting started, the Apaches would reach for those rifles, only to find worthless hunks of metal. It would be a slaughter, pure and merciless, and she'd played right into it. She was the decoy, the schoolmarm sent to keep Kaelith distracted while the noose tightened. "What the hell are you doing?" The voice came low and deadly, right at her back. Vespera spun. Kaelith stood there, back early from patrol. His gaze flicked from her bloodless face to the pried-open crates, then down to the gutted cartridge spilling sawdust on the dirt. His eyes turned pitch black. Every fragile thread of trust they'd woven over the past weeks, every spark of something softer, burned away in an instant, replaced by the deep, ancient fire of his people's hate. "You," he whispered, the word dripping poison. "Kaelith, listen," Vespera pleaded, hands raised. "I didn't know. I swear on everything, I didn't know." He moved faster than thought. One hand clamped around her throat, slamming her back against the stack of crates. The blow drove the air from her lungs in a sharp whoosh. "Liar!" he roared, face inches from hers, twisted into pure rage. "You're Voss's whore. You came here to keep my eyes on you while he hones his blade." "I'm not," she choked out, nails scraping uselessly at his iron grip. Tears carved clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "I just found them. Look, they're worthless. He wants you all dead." "And you helped him." His fingers tightened. Black spots bloomed at the edges of her vision. She saw her own end in his eyes. He was going to snap her neck right here, in front of the whole camp. "Then do it," she rasped, locking eyes with him even as darkness crept in. "Kill me, but don't lead your men to that meeting. It's a trap, Kaelith. Please, believe me." He stared, chest heaving. He saw the raw terror in her gaze, but he also saw the same unyielding steel she'd shown facing down the scalp hunters, a woman staring death in the face, using her dying breath to warn him. Voss wouldn't have told a spy the guns were fakes. A real spy had to believe the lie to sell it. His grip eased, just enough. Air scorched down her throat in a painful rush. "Why warn me?" he snarled, still pinning her in place. "Why not let us die and walk away free?" "Because you're the only man I've ever met who deserves to keep breathing more than I do," she sobbed, the confession ripping out of her like a wound. Kaelith froze. The brutal honesty sliced straight through his fury. He looked at the woman he'd meant to shatter, and realized she was the one unbreakable thing left in his world. He let go abruptly. She slid down the crates, coughing, fingers flying to her bruised throat. He towered over her, breathing hard, the violence in his blood shifting, twisting into something fiercer and far more desperate. The betrayal cut deep, but so did the bond they'd forged. They were both cornered creatures, betrayed by everything beyond these canyon walls. He reached down, seized her arm, and yanked her to her feet. But instead of striking again, he hauled her against his chest. It wasn't tender. It was a collision. Hard. Urgent. Inevitable. His mouth crashed onto hers. The kiss was punishing, raw, fueled by rage, fear, and a month of buried hunger neither had dared name. Vespera didn't fight it. She met him with equal fire, arms wrapping around his neck, clinging to him like he was the only steady thing left in a world spinning into ruin. The treaty was a sham. Peace was smoke. All they had was this blaze igniting between them, and the cold certainty that in a handful of days they'd probably both be dead. The kiss broke, not because they wanted it to end, but because reality slammed back in like a cold wind. Kaelith pulled away just enough to rest his forehead against hers, breath coming in rough gasps. For the first time, the fiercest Apache alive looked rattled, truly shaken. "We've got to move," he whispered, voice gravel rough. "If anyone saw us, if they see these crates open—" Vespera nodded, fingers still knotted in the leather of his vest. "We seal them back up. Make it look like no one touched a thing." They moved like shadows in a storm, quick, quiet, perfectly synced. Vespera carefully smoothed the wax paper back into place inside the ammunition crate, while Kaelith drove the nails home with the heel of his palm, muffling each strike with a folded strip of buckskin. They wiped fresh grease over the sabotaged rifle and eased it back into its slot among the others. When they stepped back, the crates looked exactly as they had before, innocent, untouched, their deadly secret locked tight inside wood once more. "Come," Kaelith said. This time he didn't seize her arm. He simply motioned with an open hand. It felt like an invitation, not an order. He led her not toward her ragged little wickiup, but straight to the big central lodge, the sacred council house where only warriors gathered. No woman had ever stepped inside, let alone a white prisoner. The low murmur of voices cut off the moment they entered. 12 men sat in a tight circle, pipe smoke hanging thick and blue in the firelight. Vex, the same warrior who'd burst in earlier, shot to his feet, face contorted with fury. "You bring the white woman into this place?" he snarled in Apache. "This is holy ground, Kaelith. She is not welcome here tonight." Kaelith's voice rolled out, deep and heavy with authority, filling every corner of the lodge. "She is not a woman tonight. She is a warrior who spotted the enemy's blade before it fell. Sit down, Vex. Kaelith guided Vespera to the center of the circle. Tell them, he commanded. Tell them what Voss has done. Vespera drew a long, steady breath. She met the eyes of men who had every reason to cut her throat right there. Then she lifted her chin. The guns are broken, she said clearly. The bullets are packed with sawdust. Colonel Voss has no intention of signing any treaty on Friday. He plans to slaughter you while you stand there holding useless iron. A roar of rage erupted. Knives flashed in firelight as hands flew to belts. Vex shouted, She lies! She's trying to goad us into striking first so the army can call it self-defense. I proved it to him, Vespera fired back, pointing straight at Kaelith. I showed him. Kaelith stepped forward, raising one hand. Silence dropped like a stone. She speaks the truth, he said. I saw the sawdust with my own eyes. Voss thinks we're children, thinks we'll be dazzled by shiny new rifles and never check the teeth of the gift horse. Then we fight, an older warrior named Torin bellowed. We ride tonight. We burn Tucson to ash. No, Vespera cut in. The lodge went graveyard quiet, every eye locked on her. If you hit Tucson, they'll send 5,000 soldiers, she said, voice steady as iron. They've got telegraphs. They've got trains. You can't win a war of numbers. Voss wants you to attack. He wants you to play the savage the newspapers love to write about. Kaelith looked at her, a flicker of pride flashing in his dark eyes. Then what do you suggest, teacher? Beat him at his own game, she answered. He expects you to walk into his trap, so we do. But we don't step on the trigger. She dropped to her knees in the dirt and began sketching a map with her finger. The meeting's at Blind Man's Bend, a box canyon with sheer walls. He'll put his main force out in the open looking like an honor guard. But he's a coward. He'll have another group hidden up on the ridge, probably with a Gatling gun. The warriors leaned in, listening hard now. We take the fake rifles, Vespera went on, her mind racing through every history lesson she'd ever taught. We let him see them. Let him think you're proud fools. But your real weapons stay hidden, tucked under blankets. And tonight, you send your best climbers up that ridge. She lifted her eyes to Kaelith. You take out his backup before the parley even starts. When he gives the order to fire, nothing happens. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Kaelith's face, cold, predatory, terrifying. The hunter had become the hunted. He swept his gaze around the circle. We do as she says. Get the men ready. The next 2 days blurred into careful deception. From the outside, the camp looked unchanged. Women cooking, children laughing and chasing each other. But inside every wickiup, warriors stripped down their old Winchesters, oiled them to perfection, and hid them beneath heavy ponchos. Vespera worked side by side with them. For the first time, she felt something she'd never known in the starched parlors of Tucson. Belonging. She was part of the pack now. On the last night before they rode out, the camp lay hushed. Tension hummed like a taut bowstring, ready to snap. Vespera was in Kaelith's lodge, packing strips of dried meat for the trail. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers. Kaelith stepped in quietly. He'd been praying with Ashka, the medicine man. He looked worn to the bone, the crushing burden of his people's survival grinding him down like a millstone. For a long moment, he simply watched her pack the jerky. You don't have to ride tomorrow, he said quietly. It'll be ugly. If lead starts flying, you'll be right in the thick of it. Vespera didn't lift her eyes from the dried meat. I'm coming. Voss expects me there. If I'm missing, he'll smell something rotten. Kaelith crossed the lodge in 3 strides. He gently took the strips of meat from her fingers and set them aside. Then he took her hands in his, calloused palms enveloping hers completely. "Vespera," he said, and the sound of her name in his low voice sent a shiver through her. He sank to the furs, drawing her down with him. They sat facing each other, knees brushing. "All I've ever known is war," he murmured, knuckles tracing the delicate line of her jaw. "My father fell in battle. My brothers, too. I always figured I'd die the same way. Alone, heart full of hate." He met her gaze, his face stripped bare in a way no one else had ever witnessed. Open, raw, vulnerable. "But these past weeks, you've put something else inside me, something that makes dying feel like too big a loss." Tears welled in Vespera's eyes. "Kaelith, I've got nothing to give you but a hard trail and a fast end," he whispered. "But tonight I'm just a man." He leaned in and kissed her. This time there was no anger, no fury. The kiss was slow, deep, desperate, a quiet plea wrapped in fire. Vespera melted against him, arms sliding around his neck, pulling him closer. In the warm glow of the dying embers, every wall between them, race, blood, history, war, simply dissolved. "I don't want an easy life," she breathed against his mouth. "I want this." He eased her back onto the furs. That night, surrounded by the scent of sage and the looming shadow of death, the Apache war chief and the schoolteacher never closed their eyes. They learned each other by touch and breath, forging a bond tougher than any treaty, stronger than forged steel. Hours before dawn, Kaelith rose on his elbows, gazing down at her sleeping face. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his expression reverent, almost awed. Silently he shifted, kneeling beside her on the thick pelts. He bowed his head, pressing his forehead to the back of her hand. The fiercest Apache alive, the man who knelt for no chief, no general, no god, knelt now in silent worship of the woman who had saved his soul. "If I live through tomorrow," he whispered into the dark, "I'll spend every day making sure you never regret dodging that noose." Blind Man's Bend simmered under a merciless sun, tension thick as gun smoke. Colonel Draven Voss sat behind a folding table draped in white cloth. 50 cavalrymen ranged behind him like a blue wall. He smiled as Vespera and Kaelith approached, arrogance gleaming in his eyes. He slid the treaty across the table. "Sign it," Voss ordered, voice smooth with command. "And maybe I'll show a little mercy." Kaelith picked up the pen, then slammed it down hard enough to snap the shaft and bury the point in the wood. "I'll sign when your guns aren't loaded with sawdust," he roared, kicking the table over in a crash of splintered legs and flying papers. Voss's treachery lay exposed. He snapped his fingers, signaling the hidden sharpshooters on the ridge. Silence answered. Then a single cavalry hat floated down from the cliffs like a fallen leaf. Vex and the Apache climbers stood tall on the high rocks, rifles raised in triumph. The trap had been turned inside out. "Kill them!" Voss shrieked, panic cracking his polished mask. But the Apaches were faster. Kaelith's warriors flung off their blankets, revealing well-oiled, fully functional Winchesters. The canyon erupted in thunderous gunfire. In the chaos, Voss lunged, not for a weapon, but for Vespera. He yanked her from cover, jamming the muzzle of his revolver against her temple. "Stop!" he screamed. "Stop or I blow her brains out!" The shooting died instantly. Kaelith stood in the drifting smoke, rifle leveled at Voss's chest. But he couldn't pull the trigger. Voss cowered behind Vespera, using her body as a living shield. "Drop it, savage!" he yelled, backing toward his horse. "On your knees! Beg for her life!" Kaelith looked at Vespera. He saw the terror in her eyes. The wolf who bowed to no man slowly lowered his rifle. He sank to his knees in the red dust, pride shattering like glass to save the woman he loved. "Let her go," Kaelith said, voice low and deadly calm. "I think I'll hang you both," Voss sneered. But as he tried to swing into the saddle, his grip faltered. Vespera drove her heel into his instep and slammed her head back into his face. Voss howled in pain, revolver firing wildly into the sky. Kaelith didn't stand. From his knees he drew a knife from his boot and threw it with a guttural roar. The blade flashed silver in the sun, true as an arrow. It struck Voss square in the chest, sinking to the hilt. He staggered, eyes wide with stunned disbelief, pistol slipping from numb fingers. He looked from Vespera to Kaelith, then crumpled into the red dust. Silent. Finished. Gone forever. The remaining soldiers stared at their fallen commander, then at the line of Apache rifles glinting along the ridge. One by one they dropped their weapons into the dust. The fight was done. Kaelith never spared them a glance. He scrambled across the open ground to Vespera. She sat in the dirt, body shaking, a thin line of blood trickling from her split lip. His hands moved over her in a frantic rush, searching for bullet holes, for any sign she'd been hit. "Vespera, are you hurt?" he asked, voice cracking. "I'm fine," she breathed, catching his wrists to still them. "I'm okay, Kaelith. It's finished." He yanked her into his arms, burying his face against the curve of her neck. The mighty Kaelith, the man who'd just broken the U.S. Army, was trembling like a leaf in a high wind. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered into her skin. "When he pressed that barrel to your head, part of me died right there." Vespera eased back just enough to meet his eyes. She lifted a hand and touched his cheek, smearing a streak of her own blood across his skin like war paint earned in battle. "You knelt for me," she said, voice thick with wonder. "You surrendered." "I'd burn this whole world down to cinders before I let anything touch you," he vowed, dark eyes burning into hers with fierce promise. The warriors closed in around them, but they held back, giving space. They'd witnessed their chief, the unbowed wolf, drop to his knees for this woman. They understood now. She was no longer a prisoner. She was the beating heart of the people. Kaelith rose and pulled Vespera up with him. He swept his gaze across his men, then back to her. "The treaty's dead," he said, kicking the shattered table one last time. "And so is Voss. We ride deeper into the mountains, places they'll never track us." He took her hand, fingers lacing tight with hers. "Will you come? It'll be rough. A hunted life." Vespera looked down at the dead colonel, then up at the wide, endless sky and the sharp, jagged teeth of the dragoon peaks. Then she looked at the man who'd seen her as equal, as partner, as warrior from the very start. "I don't crave an easy life, Kaelith," she said, smiling through the blood and dust. She squeezed his hand hard. "I just want to be wherever you are." A real smile broke across Kaelith's face. Open, unguarded, transforming the hard lines into something almost gentle. He lifted her onto his horse as though she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her, arms locking around her waist. They turned toward the high country, leaving the blood-soaked canyon and the dying world behind. Kaelith didn't have to speak it aloud. He'd been sent to be broken. She'd been sent to die. Instead, they'd both found the one thing worth every risk, every scar, every sunrise. The ghost of the canyon had claimed his mate, and for the first time in anyone's memory, the wolf was at peace. And that's the end of Vespera and Kaelith's trail, from a noose waiting in a prison cell to freedom carved out in the high, wild mountains. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.